Welcome back to our series on Bach's Orgelbüchlein. Today we're looking at the chorale prelude for New Year's Day in Dearest Freude. And what a joyful piece this is, and what an enormous contrast to the preceding one in the set, the piece for New Year's Eve, Das alte Jahr vergangen ist, with its heartbroken sighing and depiction of the passing of the old year. So this piece is all about joy, and we're not talking here about what we rather tongue-in-cheek termed Lutheran joy in connection with Jesu meine Freude. We're talking about real ecstatic joy and happiness. So although this prelude, like all the others in the set, does work its way systematically through the chorale itself, you're hardly aware of it because of the effect of those repeated phrases and the abandonment which the figuration seems to represent. So speaking of that constantly recurring pedal figuration, which feet do we use for that? Obviously, we can't use purely alternate toes here. We've talked before about the fact that we want to emphasize the beat, so that, for example, the third beat, the middle of the bar, wants an emphasis on it, which in turn implies that it doesn't need to be legato from the note preceding it. In other words, we can use the same foot for the note which represents the third beat of the bar as we did for the preceding one. We talked at some length about this in our episode on Erstanden ist der Heilige Christ. The title page of the whole collection says that Bach was contemplating this whole collection as something instructional, including, one of the things which he mentions is including the use of the pedals. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we could actually ask Bach which feet we should be using, how we should be pedaling this particular section? And we can. Bach had a number of pupils, as we know, including Johann Tobias Krebs, a pupil in Weimar. Krebs made his own copies of many of the chorale preludes in Orgelbüchlein while he was studying with Bach. You might ask what Krebs was actually studying with Bach. Was he studying organ performance? Was he studying church music or composition or improvisation? And I think the answer to that is that that is really the wrong question. In Bach's time, you couldn't be a cantor without thoroughly understanding and being able to practice all four of those at the same time. And I think that any kind of study with Bach would have involved doing all those four things really interdependently. You can remember from the introductory video I showed you a picture of the title page, and we discussed whether Bach almost seemed a little bit confused about what the volume was intended for, what instructional purpose it had. And I think that this is the answer to that question, that you can't really separate out those different elements, that if you're teaching one, you're teaching all of them. And the purpose, the instructional purpose of Orgelbüchlein is all four of those things together, because they belong together. But I'm digressing a little from the question, wouldn't it be great if we could ask Bach which feet to use for the individual notes? And I hinted that we could. And that's because Krebs wrote into his copy which feet to use, writing for that particular figuration, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, which is precisely what we've been talking about in previous episodes, that we're using the same foot across the beat because it doesn't need to be legato, and we want to put actually an emphasis on that third beat. And where else did Krebs get that information from that he so carefully wrote into the score if it wasn't from his teacher and the composer of the music, Bach himself? So here we can actually see Bach's comments to a pupil in a lesson. There's very few ornaments. There's just that series of double trills at the end, including one for the right hand and the feet. But they're really not problem trills in any sense. They all start inevitably from the upper note, and all of them are very easily controllable. So tempo and registration. I think rather than talking about those separately, we'll talk a little bit for a moment about performance style in general, because I think that the performance style will inform both the tempo and the registration. And I think, I was a bit hesitant about saying this, but I think that I will mention something which is completely remote from Bach, a piece written a couple of centuries later, Alain's Litania, where the composer writes in his prefatory comments about the constant repetition of the prayer, which creates this sense of ecstasy. Now, obviously, our piece is 18th century. We're not looking in the same impressionistic kind of way of thinking. But at the same time, I can't help thinking that Bach is constantly repeating this figuration of joy to such an extent that it hides the structure of the piece. It sweeps you along. And I think that this is an expression of the fact that real joy obliterates everything else, that we don't even think particularly rationally. And so I think that playing this piece almost demands a kind of ecstasy, not quite in the sense of Jean Alain, but nonetheless in a Bachian sense. I think to let go of a few inhibitions here. And so I would tend to use quite a substantial, even slightly unclear registration and a fairly upbeat tempo for that reason.